Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. Joining us. My name is Isabella Perry and I'm going to be your moderator for this presentation. Today we're going to be discussing exploring e-Steward certification and what it can do for your organization. This will be presented by Austin Matthews, PGR's EHS Program Manager, and Selena Turnock, Certification Director of e-Stewards. Now I'm going to go over some quick housekeeping. All attendees are muted for the duration of this presentation. There will be a Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions for our presenters, please use the question portion of GoToWebinar in the control panel. The slides and the recording will be available on our website after this presentation. And any additional questions, please contact us through our website for more info. I'm going to run a quick poll for everyone. Okay, and I'll give you guys a few seconds to answer. Okay, I appreciate all those responses, guys. Now, Austin and Selena will be taking away discussing today's topic.
Thank you, Isabella. I have an agenda on the slide to give you an idea of what we'll be covering during today's webinar. We already started with some introductions thanks to Isabella, but my name is Austin Matthews. I am the EHS Program Manager at PJR, and today I have Selena with me. Selena, would you like to say hi?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Selena Turnock. Like as Isabella mentioned, I am the Certification Director for e-Stewards, and I am excited and grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you all today.
We're excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. So the agenda on the slide here, again, gives you an idea of what we'll be covering. We're going to have Selena take the floor in a moment and cover some great information about e-Stewards, the history, why pursue certification, some of the benefits, and what makes e-Stewards unique. And then I will pop back in and talk about PJR very briefly and summarize the process for achieving certification for anyone who hasn't already been through the auditing process and may not know what that entails. As Isabella mentioned, we'll close with a question and answer session. So at any point during the presentation, feel free to type your questions into the question tab within the GoToWebinar panel. All right, Selena, take it away.
All right, so jumping right in to the history of the Basel Action Network, or BAN, as the industry may know it as. I just wanted to cover kind of some of the achievements and realizations that BAN uncovered in our work and how that has really led to the creation of the e-Steward standard and where we are today. So first and foremost, BAN's mission as a whole is to champion global environmental health and justice by ending toxic trade, catalyzing a toxics-free culture, and to campaign for everyone's right to a clean environment. We were founded in 1997 by Jim Puckett, really as a means to bring attention to like the mismanagement of all kinds of hazardous wastes and the risks and legality of the transboundary movement of these wastes and materials. So in the late 90s and early 2000s, as the internet age really started to unfold, it became pretty clear that electronics were becoming obsolete much faster than they had been previously. And BAN uncovered this obsolete e-waste moving from the US and other developed nations to developing countries where they were largely being dumped or burned in a very unsafe and not environmentally conscious manner. So that kind of brings us to our first point here. In 2002, BAN exposed these dumping grounds in our first documentary, which was titled Exporting Harm. And then in 2003, as we really recognized that this was going to continue to be a concern and starting to see the growth of the electronics industry, BAN created the Electronics Recyclers Pledge of True Stewardship, which was a one-page pledge made by companies to manage this e-waste material responsibly. And this was really prior to any real certifications or standards in the space. So in 2005, as we started to see more of this happening, BAN produced another documentary called The Digital Dump: Exporting Reuse and Abuse to Africa, where a dumping ground in Nigeria was the focus. And then moving to 2006 to 2008, we participated in the responsible recycling or R2 negotiations to create a standard that was endorsed by industry stakeholders. However, what we did see in field testing of the standard that was produced, it was observed that there were gaps in Basel Convention compliance. And for those of you that are not familiar with the Basel Convention, that is the treaty that regulates the legality of transboundary movements of hazardous and other wastes. So if you also are familiar with this, you are aware that the United States as a country is not party to the convention, which creates difficulties or in some cases outright bans in exporting certain materials to Basel party countries, which is essentially the entire rest of the world. So therefore, we decided to break off from the negotiations at the time, and we created the first version of the e-Steward standard, which included Basel Convention language and requirements to ensure compliance with international law with regard to e-waste specifically. So with that, the e-Steward certification program was launched with version 1 in 2009. So moving forward a few years, in November of 2013, the second version of e-Stewards was released, and version 3 released in March of 2017. In 2018, as the industry and customer expectations surrounding data security really became a high priority, BAN partnered with iSigma to sign an agreement that required all current and future e-Steward certified processors to become NAID AAA certified for electronic media. Another development in our program in 2019, we launched our Advanced Plus program, connecting employees with disabilities and those on the autism spectrum with electronics recycling jobs, which was a very exciting development for us and something that we're really proud of and we continue to do today. And then in 2020, e-Stewards released version 4.0 in February of that year, which brings us to today, where we are currently working with version 4.1. So some minor tweaks since then, but still the bulk of the standard the same as what was released in 2020. So with the growth and the change over the years, we're really proud to say that our standard has adapted throughout the new versions to industry requirements and realities for our processors. Which really brings me to the intent of the e-Steward certification program. So what is this all about? Why do we do it? The e-Steward standard was created to provide end-of-life electronics processors and their customers with a rigorous but practical certification and to provide the highest standard for globally responsible electronic recycling and refurbishment. The way e-Stewards addresses this specifically is to ensure that we are incorporating existing international trade laws, even if the country that the processor is operating in is not party to the Basel Convention. So this just really helps to ensure conformance in the case of export of materials. We also incorporate occupational health and safety requirements, which helps all certified processors to be held to the same standards, again, regardless of which country they are operating in. We additionally have the NAID AAA certification prerequisite for strict data security to ensure kind of that comprehensive review of that very important topic. And finally, certification to e-Stewards provides accountability, transparency, and social and environmental justice for our processors. So in general, why should a recycler or refurbisher even pursue a certification like e-Stewards? And I think a good way to answer that is to really just understand the basics and some key terms. And that our industry in general is full of both mandatory and voluntary options. So mandatory standards are things such as your OSHA or EPA requirements, maybe some state regulations, permitting requirements for certain state programs or operational permits. And while certification, which is the end goal for many processors wishing to be accountable and transparent, that's the formal recognition that an organization or product meets the requirements of a standard, usually through third-party verification, such as the service that Perry Johnson offers with that third-party auditing and certification. A standard is that set of guidelines or requirements established to ensure consistency, safety, quality, and ethics in products, services, or processes. So I mentioned that there's mandatory and voluntary standards, and that of course applies not just in our industry, but in most, if not all. And e-Stewards is an example of a voluntary standard. So in general, it's not required to be e-Steward certified unless that requirement is placed on a processor by way of a customer contract, maybe some state EPR programs or permitting requirements. However, becoming e-Steward certified is one of the best ways to really showcase your organization's commitment to compliance and setting the bar higher than simply just kind of following the bare minimum or the law. And in conjunction with these other voluntary standards on the screen here, which are also prerequisites to e-Steward certification, your organization in becoming e-Steward certified will stand out as a trustworthy partner to your clients. In choosing e-Stewards, your organization will cover the environmental aspect with your choice of either the RIO certification, which is tailored to the recycling industry, or the Environmental Management System certification, ISO 14001, that I'm sure many of us are very familiar with. In addition to that, as I've already mentioned a few times here, NAID AAA certification is the prerequisite for comprehensive data security. So in pursuing e-Stewards as a package, your organization could be considered the one-stop shop to your clients or potential clients in the industry. So really to sum it up, why it may be important to even pursue certification, voluntary standards are really what make organizations and companies shine to their customers, potential clients, and even internally to like employees or investors. You're really showcasing and highlighting that your organization is taking that next step to set the bar higher. Choosing a voluntary certification really means choosing to bring that extra scrutiny and oversight that comes with compliance to the standard, and that choice sets your organization apart from others. Voluntary standards like e-Stewards prescribe best practices beyond the law or other requirements. They increase your environmental health and safety initiatives. They provide your customers with assurance for the responsible management of their sensitive materials. They ease your burden of compliance by ensuring that you're performing these things every day and not just, when there's audits or when you have to. And they give your company the competitive advantage in responding to bids or other customer contracts. So going over what voluntary standards are and how they can help, I'd like to kind of touch on a little bit more specifically what some of the key benefits of choosing e-Stewards are. So of course, as we've kind of already mentioned, e-Stewards helps to enhance your customers' trust and also, as mentioned, ease that burden of compliance. And that really happens by ensuring that your operations conform to standard requirements on a daily basis. It really just becomes second nature for your facilities and your processes when you are certified. And e-Stewards additionally also helps to support that global environmental sustainability factor as well. So to help put the importance of a certification program such as ours in perspective, for those of you that have really been in this industry for a while, I'm sure you've seen the articles or news stories with pictures such as these, which really shows what can happen when bad actors in the industry get a hold of volumes of end-of-life electronics. We see stockpiles such as this occur where sensitive data may be unsecured. Or we could see potential large volumes of hazardous materials, such as the CRTs in the next photo, which have been stored outside long term, where it creates additional hazards to even manage this material due to, as you can see, the packaging breaking down from being weathered. It may be difficult to move, and also just potentially expose the surrounding environment. Or we see situations such as this last picture where material is illegally sent to countries that just don't have that proper infrastructure to ensure the safe handling of end-of-life electronics. And this type of processing exposes employees or even surrounding communities to potential hazards such as lead, cadmium, or other heavy metals in order to extract the small amounts of precious metals that you can find in like wire or circuit boards or things of that nature. These in this picture, these are the kinds of operations and conditions that BAN began to expose in the early 2000s, which in part led to the creation of the e-Steward standard and certification program. So with that being said, what are some of the unique features of e-Stewards and how can we address some of these major concerns? The first is the comprehensive requirement for the responsible management of materials of concern. So under this umbrella term, MOCs, or material of concern, We have hazardous e-waste, or HEWs, and problematic components or materials, also known as PCMs. These materials are required to be tracked from the point of control, whether that's at a customer's facility when your organization is coming in to receive it, the dock of your facility, a collection event, even just a collection point, whatever infrastructure you may have. It's required to be tracked through the recycling chain to end of life. So this tracking throughput builds credibility and trust that our e-Stewards members are performing the proper due diligence and utilizing trustworthy vendors for their material. Other ways this is verified is by the scheduled CB audits, including the stage 1 and stage 2 initial audits to become certified, your annual surveillance audits, or the recertification audit that occurs every 3 years of your audit cycle. We also utilize the e-Stewards Performance Verification Program, which I will go into more in depth on in a minute, and the e-Stewards Critical Nonconformity Policy, which allows for additional oversight by BAN over our certified members. And then lastly, you have your other forms of conformity assurance, such as your regular internal audits, compliance evaluations, risk assessments, things of that nature that are required as part of standard compliance. The next unique feature of e-Stewards is that we are an organizational-based certification program, which differs from some other options in the industry. And having this approach to certification provides transparency, ensures consistency in material management, and builds credibility with your customers, who will know that no matter what facility the material is going into for multi-sited organizations, that material is being managed in a manner that's compliant with e-Stewards certification. The requirements in the standard call for all processing facilities under the same ownership to be e-Stewards certified, and this can include sister companies, parent company, or subsidiaries if there is processing of electronics occurring. So if there's some other type of operation happening that has nothing to do with electronics, that obviously would not qualify for e-Stewards certification in that case, but any related company that is performing end-of-life electronics processing would fall under this requirement of the standard. The standard also requires that all facilities must be certified within 18 months from the date of the certification of the first facility. And this requirement is on a country-by-country basis. So that means that the certification of all facilities within one country must follow this structure. And if a company has facilities located in other countries, they can choose to certify to e-Stewards at a later date. But same thing, once they're contracted for e-Stewards certification, all facilities within that country must follow the same structure and timeline that we just went over. So as I mentioned a few slides back, e-Stewards has what we call our performance verification program. And this program has really been welcomed by our certified members of our community as a way to showcase processors doing it right. This also helps to enhance the credibility of the certification itself by ensuring that any willfully dishonest companies or those with egregious nonconformances against standard requirements can be policed with direct oversight by BAN. This PV program, as we call it, utilizes truly unannounced inspections of certified facilities, which are randomly chosen each year or could be chosen as a complaint is perhaps issued. We also deploy GPS-tracked units into material streams to ensure that only approved and properly vetted downstreams are used, and hazardous materials are not being exported to developing countries. In addition to the PV program, we also have our critical nonconformity policy, which I touched on, which is utilized in serious cases of nonconformance beyond that of your typical minor or major nonconformances that may be given by CB auditors. Another pillar of the e-Stewards program that is unique to us is the e-Stewards Leadership Council. This council acts as the e-Stewards advisory body and is comprised of various industry experts such as representatives from OEMs, certified processors, e-Steward enterprise companies, NGOs, or other associations that really help to just shape our program in general. And in addition to that, our LC members' terms are cycled to ensure that new voices are brought in and can be heard, throughout our term cycles in general. And as for the structure of the actual certification program itself, we are an all or nothing certification, which means that all requirements in the standard must be addressed, whether they apply or not. You have to be able to show why something may not apply to your organization. And there are specific sections of the standard that auditors must review at each audit to ensure completion and accountability. Lastly, we do have specific logo use requirements, which only allows entities that have an executed license agreement with e-Stewards to utilize our logo in any way, which helps to ensure that certification is not misrepresented, and reserves the right to fly the e-Stewards flag to those that have only met all of the requirements of the standard and have been audited and certified by an accredited certification body as such. Some other additional features of e-Stewards, some important topics that we have included in the standard include industrial hygiene monitoring for processors that utilize potentially hazardous processing technologies, or PHPT as we call it. This monitoring is required to ensure employee protection. We also have material balance accounting, which is unique to e-Stewards, and this is performed to ensure tracking throughput of material, which helps to ensure that outbound materials are not only sent out, obviously, to approved downstream vendors, but are also acknowledged as received by those vendors. And lastly, we have continual improvement, which is very similar to a lot of other standards in the space as well. We do require the completion of internal audits, compliance evaluations, as I've already mentioned, and we also use continual improvement mechanisms such as detailed objectives, risk analyses, or corrective action plans. All right, so this kind of last section here, I wanted to detail our approach towards how we manage the standard and certification program, which again may differ from others in the industry. And really the best way to kind of sum this up is what we say as being principled yet practical. So in our approach to being principled, our first piece here is that we are ethical. It's our underlying mission to prevent the global e-waste dumping and release of private data, and to protect human health and the environment. So this is exemplified by BAN's work over the years and the creation of the standard itself. But another example of this is the addition of the NAID AAA certification as a prerequisite, requiring all data-bearing devices to be secured at all times. However, taking that kind of one step further, e-Stewards also requires that no customer data can leave a processor's control unless going to an immediate downstream provider who must also be NAID AAA certified and who will then perform the data sanitization or destruction. So this really helps to ensure that clients can trust an e-Steward with their sensitive data. The next piece here is that we're legal. So I've already kind of mentioned this a few times, but we align our requirements and definitions with international law, which helps to ease that burden of compliance for our community. And again, taking this one step further, our parent organization, BAN, attends all Basel Convention meetings to ensure that we have up-to-date knowledge regarding international regulations. And when these meetings occur, there's any important information that comes from them, such as like the recent Basel amendments having to do with plastics and e-waste that have gone into effect. Our representatives summarize this information in notifications to our community, or we may produce FAQ documents. So we're communicating any of these impending changes as soon as we have the knowledge of it. And then lastly, on the principled side, we are accountable. And I know, like I've mentioned this many times already, but being an e-Steward means having performance verified with GPS tracking and unannounced inspections. This provides triple layer protection for your clients and more reasons to really celebrate and highlight your organization doing the right thing after successfully completing your annual CB audits, hosting an unannounced inspection, or being able to prove with tracking evidence that the materials of concern entering the control of your organization are managed responsibly and legally in accordance with international law. So while we remain principled, we also must remain practical, and this has really never been more important than in recent years. This first part being responsive, we aim to be responsive to ensure that our standard of best practices evolves as necessary in an ever-changing industry. And to support this, our standard committee is on deck and dedicated to keeping the standard up to date as the industry shifts or new requirements must be considered. We also are flexible. And this is something that we really pride ourselves on. We highly encourage innovation and value our processors' knowledge. We consider and vet amendments to the standard on a case-by-case basis. And a perfect example of this is in a sanction interpretation that was passed last year, which revised the battery load testing requirements, which was based on feedback and a study that was produced by one of our e-Stewards certified processors. This processor was able to provide us with data showing that the battery load test that was written into the standard was kind of duplicative and inefficient. So they supplied us with the proposed amendment, which was voted on and approved by the e-Stewards community. So just really showing that if something needs to change, we are willing and able to do that. And last but not least, we are clear. So over the years, if you've been familiar with e-Stewards, it's been made abundantly clear that complexity does not equate to strength. And it is really necessary for our standard to be concise and straightforward for the best understanding and implementation for our certified processors. While we're keeping this kind of top of mind as we continue, on this journey, and how we adjust the standard in any way, we have overall reduced the length by about 53% from version 3.1 to version 4.1, all without compromising the rigor that e-Stewards is known for. And I think that is passing it over to you, Austin.
Thank you so much, Selena. I've presented a similar webinar in the past to explain, the benefits of e-Steward certification to our clients, but it's so great having you here and getting to hear your perspective. So thank you again so much for your time.
Of course.
Okay, yep. So I will take over the next couple of slides to wrap the presentation up, and then we'll switch gears to a question and answer session. Just to reiterate something that was shared in previous slides, because it is so important and we get questions on this subject often, the e-Steward standard does have prerequisite requirements. So this is an either or and situation, and I think this slide is really clear. We're looking for an environmental management system certification, ISO 14001, or RIOS. You certainly would not need both. RIOS incorporates the environmental management system requirements with quality and health and safety. So RIOS is a quality, environmental, health, and safety management system standard. ISO 14001 really hones in on the environmental management system. Either will suffice and meet the e-Stewards prerequisite criteria. Separate from fulfilling this box, we also need to check the data security box, and at this time the requirement for that is only NAID AAA certification. So you would need one from each of these two categories to meet the prerequisite criteria for e-Stewards. And just to go back a slide quickly, PJR does offer certification to the environmental management systems, while NAID AAA certification is not provided by PJR. That is through iSigma, which Selena touched on earlier. So we recommend, or rather require, that at least this certification is in place while you can be pursuing e-Stewards in conjunction with the environmental management system if you're utilizing a CV that offers that as well. Something to keep in mind as you're planning ahead. Also, something to keep in mind as you're planning ahead, the key costs associated with e-Steward certification specifically. Certainly there could be costs in terms of preparing your organization, and we'll talk more about what implementing the standard looks like and pursuing certification, but preparations are inevitably part of the process. You will have audit fees as well, correlating to the audit days for the stage 1 and stage 2 audits for initial certification, as well as ongoing annual audits that Selena mentioned as well. So audit fees are a key cost as well. e-Stewards does have a license and marketing fee to include in your estimations of cost as well. And this will vary by the number of facilities covered by the certification. Just to talk really briefly about Perry Johnson registrars, or PJR. PJR is one of the leading registrars. We have certified companies to a variety of standards, around the world. I used to have a little list on this slide that gave some examples of the countries we've certified clients to, but as we grow, it just becomes less and less relevant. So I took it out, and suffice to say, we have, again, certified clients to a variety of standards around the globe, which is really exciting. PGR is accredited to grant certification for a variety of standards. As I mentioned, of course, today we are speaking about e-Stewards, but there are a number of others. I mentioned that we could provide the ISO 14001 certification or the RIOS certification if those are the prerequisite, whichever prerequisite standard you choose, if you would like to get them both from the same CV or certification body. We'd be happy to help you with that. In terms of pursuing initial certification, again, I wanted to provide an overview of what that looks like in case you are brand new to certification. If you are certified to other standards and are considering adding e-Stewards to the mix, maybe you can tune out a little bit during this part, but it might have some relevant details nonetheless. The first step in pursuing certification, initial certification, is to apply for the certification. Not only does e-Stewards have an application process, you would also need to apply with a certification body for them to begin the process of calculating the audit duration and scheduling those audits. You won't get very far without either of those steps being completed. Next, obtaining a copy of the standard is very important as well. This is how your organization will be able to review and understand what requirements are found in the standard, what is being asked of the organization, and you might consider a gap analysis as well to understand what areas you need to focus. Maybe some of the requirements of the standard are already being met by your current processes, while others may be things that need to be implemented. A gap analysis can help understand the difference between your current operations and the standard requirements, so you can focus your energy where it is best suited. Establishing the management system documentation to meet the standard requirements would be the next step. Training is required and highly relevant to both implementing the management system and making your employees and stakeholders as relevant aware of what e-Stewards requires. So training is really important and is a subset of the implementation process. So on the next step, I have implement the management system because that goes beyond training employees and making them aware. Implementing the management system will correlate to the documentation that you've created, actually putting those requirements into action and maintaining records as evidence of that implementation, of taking those actions and maintaining those processes. Records are going to be very important when it comes time for your audits. An internal audit will also be required to check whether the management system has effectively been implemented, whether the standard requirements are being met, and this can be conducted by in-house employees or outsourced to another party that specializes in conducting these type of audits. It can be eye-opening, especially if a gap analysis was not utilized, to understand where the organization can improve. And this is a powerful tool as well to ensure readiness for the audits to come. Similarly, conducting a compliance evaluation is a required step prior to pursuing, or rather having, your initial certification audits. The difference between an internal audit and a compliance evaluation, for anyone who is not aware, an internal audit is looking at the standard requirements, while a compliance evaluation is focused on the applicable legal and other requirements for a given facility. These are often location-based, process-based. There's a whole host of requirements that could vary from facility to facility compared to the standard requirements, which essentially apply to all e-Stewards organizations. Conducting a management review is the next step. We like to see this conducted after the audits have taken place, so that the audit results can be an input or a point of discussion during the management review. It could be an opportunity to decide how to tackle those issues if they were identified, perhaps identify the need to reallocate resources, things like that. So the audits prior to the management review. And then lastly, of course, the audits themselves. Selena mentioned earlier that there would be a stage 1 and a stage 2 audit prior to initial certification, and I speak to that more on the next slide. As a reminder, these steps are not speaking to the prerequisite requirements that have been explained now a couple of times. And the reason for that is because it might not be done with the same certification body. So NAID AAA certification would be separate. You might potentially be pursuing ISO 14001 or RIOS with the same certification body in tandem with e-Stewards, or you may already have those requirements in place with a different or the same certification body predating your addition of e-Stewards. Initial registration or initial certification consists of 2 stages. We have a stage 1 audit, which primarily focuses on the management system documentation. We assess whether that documented framework or those processes meet the standard requirements. It also serves to evaluate the readiness of the organization to proceed to that stage 2 audit. The stage 2 audit, on the other hand, assesses the entire management system and all of the organization's processes to sample in order to verify effective implementation of those requirements of the standard and the organization's documented procedures. I wanted to note here that any nonconformities identified during a stage 2 audit will need to be resolved before a certificate can be issued. So if NCRs or nonconformities are identified during the stage 2, we look for resolution and evidence of implementation from the client. Then we perform a technical review to make sure that everything was accomplished before we issue your final certificate. Once certified, the steps for maintaining the certification look a little bit different. Here we most often see annual audits, although we do have some contracts that indicate or prefer semi-annual audits, so that would be an option as well. Most times the audits are annual, so we see a 3-year cycle once that certificate is issued. The first 2 years of that cycle include surveillance audits. These are similar to a stage 2, however, they're partial system audits. We do not need to sample all of the standard requirements and all of the processes here. Annual sampling criteria are stipulated by the e-Stewards standard. So between the 2 surveillance audits, we are covering all of the processes plus whatever is stipulated to be an annual sampling item. The 3rd year in the cycle constitutes a recertification audit before the certificate expires to perform another full system audit, very similar to the stage 2. So certificates are good for 3 years, and the recertification audit serves to result in a new certificate again for 3 years. The cycle continues with 2 years of surveillance audits and another recertification audit, and so on. That is a high-level summary of the certification process, again, for anyone who is not familiar with what certification audits entail or kind of the timeline of events. Hopefully that's helpful if you're new to that, and if you stopped paying attention because you're already certified, now would be the time to unglaze your eyes and start paying attention again, because we will take questions at this time. If you haven't typed them into the question field, please feel free to do so now. I'll give anyone who might be typing still another moment, and then we will get into any questions that we have received. In the meantime, while you're typing, I do have contact information listed on this slide for Perry Johnson registrars. If you're looking for a certification body to conduct your e-Stewards audit, possibly even your ISO 14001 or RIOS, or any of the other standards that I listed we are accredited to, please feel free to reach out. We can be contacted by phone, through our email address, and through our website. So please feel free to reach out. Let's check the question tab next. Okay, so I don't see any at the moment, but I'm happy to hang out for another few moments in case someone is typing. Otherwise, thank you so much for attending today's webinar. And Selena, thank you again for joining me. It was so great to have your perspective. Maybe we could do it again sometime. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I'll just add that, if there is anybody that has any e-Steward specific questions, please feel free to reach out through our website as well, which is just e-Stewards.org. And we'd be happy to answer, standard questions, interpretation questions, or just anything regarding the program as well. So thank you so much for having me today. And I really appreciated the time to talk.
Thank you so much, Selena. I'm still not seeing any questions, so I am going to go ahead and end the webinar. A recording and a copy of the slides will be on PJR's website as promised. Thank you so much for your time today, everyone. Have a great day.